Chapter 1950 Love at First Sight. Chapter 1950 Love at First Sight. Liu Han endured the boiling pain in her chest, and said, "I've lost." She accepted this result wholeheartedly. Hunyou felt extremely smug, and she said, "Ugly *T, you're mine in the future. You're not allowed to seduce any other men, do you understand?" She suddenly realized that just beating Liu Han up wasn't enough. After all, dying cinders might glow again, so this wasn't a comprehensive approach. However, what if Liu Han fell in love with a non-existent person? At that time, this ugly *T wouldn't try to seduce Ling Han anymore. She was truly very smart. A blush spread across Liu Han's face. By saying this, was he announcing his ownership over her? Just look, he was already becoming jealous, and not wanting her to have any relationships with other men. His jealousy was astonishing, yet she also felt that it was incredibly adorable. Her entire body became soft and limp. Millimeter. She lowered her head and nodded in obedience. Everyone was stunned upon seeing this. He had won over the second most beautiful woman in the wide prosperity heaven just like that. Holy fuck. Ling Han more so didn't know whether to cry or to laugh. He hadn't imagined that Hunyou would ignore his words and not stay at home. Not only that, but she had actually disguised as a man to capture the hearts of beautiful women. "Friend, how should I refer to you?" Liu Jie asked with a smile. However, his mind was filled with shock. Another monarch tier had suddenly appeared. Moreover, he hadn't received any information about them beforehand. This left him extremely astonished. Not only that, but this young man was also frighteningly powerful. He had defeated Liu Han in just a few strikes, and this reminded him of the freaks in the wide prosperity heaven. Hunyou shot a sideways glance at him before placing her hands on her hips, and saying, "What, are you interested in Nyo?" Fuck. Everyone was drenched in sweat upon hearing this. This demeanor, this tone. Which part of him seemed like a man? He was clearly like a mischievous young girl. Liu Jie involuntarily frowned, and said, "Friend, are you a man or a woman?" "What's it to you?" Hunyou glared at him, and said, "I'm warning you, don't have any indecent thoughts." Liu Jie's frown became even deeper, and he said, "Since you're a woman, why are you playing such a prank?" "Brother, what nonsense are you speaking?" Liu Han immediately chided. Her face was filled with anger, and she said, "How can he be a woman?" Everyone was astonished upon hearing this. Had she gone blind? It was as clear as day that she was a female. Yet, she was still deeply attracted to her. "Little sister, wake up. Look carefully, which part of her seems like a man?" Liu Jie said in a frantic voice. Liu Han glanced at Hunyou, and she only felt like his handsomeness was making her heart flutter. Although he was slightly feminine, this was because of his androgynous nature. How was he a woman? These men were simply jealous. Just look at them. Which one of them was even 1/10 as handsome as this handsome young man? Hunyou became even more smug, and she said, "Girl, you're mine in the future." Ling Han shook his head, and said, "Hunyou, enough with the nonsense." Hunyou didn't so much as glance at him, and she shouted, "Hunyou? Who's Hunyou? Don't utter such nonsense." Everyone facepalmed upon hearing this. She had just been referring to herself as Nyo just then, so Hunyou was almost certainly her name. Her futile denial was far too obvious. "Come on, don't misbehave," Ling Han said in a gentle voice. He had a habit of treating Hunyou like a mischievous glutton. However, Hunyou was extremely determined this time. If she saw someone as a threat, she would immediately rush over to capture their hearts first. That way, Ling Han would be safe, as expected of Nyo. She was far too smart. She continued to ignore Ling Han, and she gestured for Liu Han to come over. The stunning beauty was extremely shy as she walked over. The two of them walked side by side, with one of them breathtakingly handsome and one of them as beautiful as a flower. At a glance, they were like a match made in heaven. "Brother Ling, is this person your friend?" Liu Jie asked. Ling Han rubbed his nose and nodded in confirmation. He was speechless at Hunyou's actions. "Brother Ling, only you can resolve this situation," Liu Jie said. He was extremely good at offloading responsibility, and he directly kicked the ball into Ling Han's court. The banquet continued, yet no one's mind was on proper matters anymore. They were all glancing at Hu Niu and Liu Han. One was wearing an expression of impatience, while the other was wearing an expression of shyness. There was also an expression of love and fondness in the latter's eyes, and it was clear that she had fallen deeply in love. Love at first sight was truly a dangerous matter. Mo Shuang shuffled over with a gossipy expression, and asked, "Brother Ling, is that your wife?" Ling Han glanced at him and didn't reply. "Then what should I do?" Mo Shuang asked with a pained expression. Not long ago, Ling Han had still said that he would help him pick up some girls. Now, however, Ling Han's own woman had picked up some girls. Just what in the world was this? "Just forget about it," Ling Han replied. Hu Niu was determined to see this through, so there was nothing he could do about it, either. "However, we still reaped great rewards today," Mo Shuang said with an excited expression. After all, Liu Han only represented an impossible dream. He also knew that it was impossible for him to win her over, so he didn't feel disappointed for too long. "How much did we make?" Ling Han asked. His eyes also lit up. "In terms of starstones alone, we made almost 7 million. In addition to this, we also obtained a large amount of pseudo-divine metal and a large number of alchemical pills. In total, they're worth more than 20 million. Mo Shuang replied in a quiet voice. Technically speaking, 20 million wasn't a huge amount for ascending origin tier forces. However, 2 measly severing mundane tier cultivators earning so much in a single day. This was an astounding number. Even though Mo Shuang had experienced many grand things before, he still couldn't help but be beside himself with excitement. Ling Han nodded, and said, "We'll split it 50-50. "How can we do that?" Mo Shuang hurriedly shook his head, and said, "Brother Ling, are you looking down on me? I essentially did nothing, and it was all thanks to Brother Ling's astounding alchemical talent that we earned so much. I can only take 30% at most." "Fine," Ling Han said. He didn't insist on his original proposal. However, Mo Shuang had done much more than he gave himself credit for. If it weren't for his status as the 7th of the Mo clan, who would have proposed a gamble with Ling Han? Thus, giving him 30% wasn't much. When the banquet concluded, Ling Han followed Chen Dong and Ma Yong to visit Zhufeng. Using a transfer formation, they covered countless kilometers and arrived beneath a towering mountain. This mountain was like an azure mountain from the paintings, with limpid waters flowing in its midst. The surrounding scenery was breathtakingly beautiful. They ventured along the mountain path, and it wasn't long before they arrived in front of a large courtyard. Ling Han immediately hummed in surprise. This was because this courtyard looked far too similar to alchemist Zi Cheng's residence. After entering, this feeling only became stronger. Even without Ma Yong and Chen Dong's guidance, Ling Han could have definitely located the alchemy room, the main hall, the left and right garden, and the medicine garden. By the looks of it, this third senior brother still hadn't walked out from Grandmaster Zi Cheng's shadows. Even the layout of his residence was heavily influenced by that of Grandmaster Zi Cheng's. Of course, this could also be viewed as Zhufeng reminiscing the past. Perhaps he couldn't forget his experiences with Grandmaster Zi Cheng. It wasn't long before the three of them arrived at the guest hall. Ling Han looked over, only to see a middle-aged man sitting on the central seat. His eyebrows were thick, and his eyes were large. However, his hair was already all white. This appeared extremely conflicting with the rest of his features. The middle-aged man laughed heartily upon seeing Ling Han, and said, "Junior brother." With a single glance, Ling Han could already tell that this was Zhufeng. It was clear that he wasn't an imposter. Genuine grandmasters would all possess an indescribable aura. The greater their skill in alchemy, the more obvious this aura would become. Ling Han also wore a wide smile as he strode over, and said, "Third senior brother." When he arrived before Zhufeng, he bowed deeply, and said, "Ling Han pays respects to third senior brother." "No need for such formalities," Zhufeng said as he helped Ling Han up. He didn't wait for Ling Han to bow even further. "I received Master's message saying that he accepted a new junior brother for the three of us just then. I was still thinking what this third junior brother looked like. Now, I finally have the chance to see you today. He turned around and said, Zijuan, are you not going to kneel and apologize to your senior uncle? Chapter 1951, Punishment. Chapter 1951, Punishment. There were two other people in the hall. One was Zhu Zijuan, and the other was Peng Huanyan. Zhu Zijuan's expression immediately changed upon hearing this, and he said in stubbornness, Grandpa, I didn't do anything wrong. Zhu Feng flared up in rage, and he roared, Brat, you disrespected your senior, yet you're still saying that you did no wrong. Zhu Zijuan gritted his teeth, and said, But my original intent wasn't wrong. I was just furious that someone dared to impersonate Grandpa's junior brother. Those who are unknowing can't be guilty, so I don't think that I did anything wrong. Oh. Then did I also teach you to steal and swap out other people's alchemical pills? Did I teach you to cheat others? Zhu Feng asked. Even his hair was billowing in fury, and his gaze was as intense as could be. He was an ascending origin tier elite, so Zhu Zijuan naturally couldn't withstand his might. With a thud, he had already fallen to his knees. He couldn't help but tremble. Ling Han didn't persuade Zhu Feng to stop. After all, regardless of how talented Zhu Zijuan was in alchemy, if his personality wasn't set straight, things would never change. If he practiced cultivation, he would only end up hurting others. If he practiced alchemy, he would only end up aiding evil forces. Neither of these was a good result. If Zhu Zijuan had been Ling Han's disciple or future generation disciple, he would have already expelled him for good. However, Zhu Feng was only his senior brother in name, so he naturally couldn't extend his reach too far. Zhu Zijuan went extremely pale. He could make excuses for everything else, but he naturally couldn't make any excuse for swapping Ling Han's pill out. He had ordered this, and Ran Fei and Shi Yong had already made a confession. He didn't even have the chance to find a sacrificial lamb. From a young age, you already displayed extreme talent in alchemy. By the looks of it, my hopes in you were too high, and I ended up forgetting to teach you how to be a proper person, Zhu Feng said with a shake of his head. He wore a pained expression on his face. He paused for a brief moment before continuing, As punishment, I forbid you from using the Zhu surname for 100 million years. Moreover, you're not allowed to mention that you're an alchemist from the Zicheng branch. You can travel the world as an ordinary person. Grandpa! Zhu Zijuan shouted. He almost jumped up upon hearing this. He was the most brilliant descendant of the Zhu clan, yet he was actually being sent into exile now? How could he accept this? Zhu Feng's gaze became sharp, and he said in a baleful voice, Perhaps you want me to cripple your cultivation and banish you from the Zhu clan forever. Zhu Zijuan's face became as white as a sheet. He knew that his grandfather had already made up his mind. He could only slowly make his way up from the bottom again. He started to leave the hall, and each of his steps was extremely heavy. It was as if his legs had been filled with lead. He looked much like an old and ailing candle guttering in the wind. He was filled with disappointment and dejection. Zhu Feng's heart softened, and he almost called out to retract his command. In the end, however, he kept his lips tightly shut. Ling Han saw this, and he could only sigh in his mind. It looked like Zhu Feng was punishing Zhu Zijuan, but he was more so giving Zhu Zijuan some challenges through which he could improve himself. Zhu Zijuan was already talented enough in alchemy. However, alchemy required more than just one's hands. It also required one's mind and heart. He hoped that Zhu Zijuan could understand his grandfather's earnest care. If he could comprehend this within 100 million years, his future would definitely be bright and limitless. Otherwise, a petty and narrow-minded person couldn't walk far in either cultivation or alchemy. On the side, Peng Huanyan was also trembling slightly. Even Zhu Zijuan, Zhu Feng's grandson, had suffered such severe punishment. Thus, as he was a disciple, his situation was even more perilous. Huanyan. Sure enough, Zhu Feng glanced over after dealing with Zhu Zijuan. Peng Huanyan hurriedly shuffled over, and said with utmost respect, Master. You've also disappointed me greatly, Zhu Feng said with a shake of his head. Peng Huanyan fell to his knees in fright, and said, This disciple acknowledges his wrongdoings. Master, please give me an opportunity to reform myself. Where did you do wrong? Zhu Feng asked. Peng Huanyan pondered for a moment before answering. I was too arrogant and haughty before, and I viewed everyone else with contempt because I was a 3-star alchemist and also the disciple of a grandmaster. I got too far ahead of myself. Zhu Feng nodded and said, what hurts me most is that not only were you wildly arrogant, but even your disciples were the same. This is a clear reflection of just how haughty and arrogant you've become. Peng Huanyan kowtowed and said, I understand my mistakes. You can leave now. As your punishment, refine 1,000 cauldrons of alchemical pills. During this time, you're not allowed to take a single step out of this place. I hope you can focus all of your attention on alchemy, Zhu Feng said. This disciple understands. Peng Huanyan said. He finally breathed a sigh of relief. Even though refining 1,000 cauldrons of alchemical pills would take an exorbitant amount of time, at the very least, he hadn't been expelled. This allowed him to breathe a huge sigh of relief. Zhu Feng waved his hand to dismiss Peng Huanyan. He then turned to Ling Han and said, sorry for making you witness this embarrassment. No, don't say that. Third senior brother has focused all of his attention on alchemy, so it's difficult to avoid such situations, Ling Han said. Zhu Feng laughed and said, let's not talk about these depressing matters. Is Master still doing well? He's doing amazing. He's raking in money every day, and even his hands are starting to cramp from counting money, Ling Han said with a chuckle. Zhu Feng couldn't help but grin upon hearing this. Grandmaster Zi Cheng was good at everything, yet he was far too attracted to money. No matter what it was, he would always try to think of a way to make money with it. The two of them chit-chatted for a moment before Ling Han took his leave. Because he had already become accustomed to living at the Mo clan, he politely declined Zhu Feng's offer to stay at his place. In any case, Zhu Feng's grand celebration was in 3 days, so he would leave for the Three Blooms Valley after this celebration concluded. Upon arriving at the Mo clan, Mo Shuang had already collected all of Ling Han's winnings for him. He had placed them into several spatial god tools, and the heavenly phoenix divine maiden was currently checking over them in delight. She was much like a female housekeeper. Ling Han couldn't see Hunyao anywhere, so he couldn't help but ask, her? Where's Hunyao? Don't mention it. When she returned earlier, there was even a woman following behind her, insisting that Hunyao head over to propose marriage. As a result, Hunyao ran off again, the heavenly phoenix divine maiden said with a strange expression. Say, were women this open nowadays? They were even willing to marry other women? Ling Han faltered upon hearing this. He then shook his head. He hadn't imagined that Liu Han would be so deeply intoxicated by Hunyao. She wasn't even suspecting Hunyao's gender. Night fell, and Hunyao finally returned. So how did you deal with her? Ling Han asked with a chuckle. Hunyao pouted and said, that was no fun at all. I'm definitely not doing that again in the future. She had initially thought that Liu Han would stop pestering Ling Han if she captured the other's heart first. In the end, however, she had become the one being pestered. It would be far easier to simply shoo them away from Ling Han. You told her that you're female? Hunyao nodded and said, I told her. Ling Han also nodded. Since Hunyao had personally admitted to being a woman, Liu Han would most likely put this awkward episode of misplaced love behind her. Even though Liu Han would be angry and embarrassed for a while, this was still far better than continuing with the misplaced love. In the following few days, Ling Han kept an extremely low profile. After all, there was no one else for him to screw over. He exchanged all of his star stones for level 20 godly metal, yet this still wasn't enough to raise his divine demon sword to the 4th star. It was still a sliver away from reaching this level. The day for Zhu Feng's grand celebration finally arrived. There was a sea of guests, and even ascending origin tier forces had dispatched their grand elders to congratulate Zhu Feng. In fact, even the Universal Cloud Celestial King had specially sent Liu Jie over to represent him in congratulating Zhu Feng. Ling Han brought the Empress, Hunyao, the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden, and Bewitching Maiden Ru over. With a handsome man and 3 beautiful women, they were naturally very eye-catching. However, on a day like this, even profligate and haughty people didn't dare to cause any trouble. At the most, they would only steal a few extra glances. Is this Uncle Ling? Someone suddenly asked in a sarcastic voice. Ling Han looked over, only to see a young man walking over. As this young man gazed at him, an expression of ridicule spread across his face. Chapter 1952, Asking for Advice. Chapter 1952, Asking for Advice. Ling Han simply glanced at him, and didn't say anything. This was his way of showing disdain. He couldn't even be bothered replying. The young man was angered. He raised his voice, and sarcastically said, I'm Liu Xing, the 9th disciple of Xiao Lixing, Grandmaster Xiao. My respects to fourth uncle. Fourth uncle, you're not so arrogant that you'll ignore your own juniors, right? Xiao Lixing was the 2nd disciple of Grandmaster Zi Cheng. At that time, he had left for the distant dispelling cloud heaven, and right now, he had already become a renowned Grandmaster there. He had been invited as an esteemed guest to the Return to Origin Palace, and his status was now extremely transcendent. Thus, this Liu Xing was naturally Ling Han's junior nephew. The 3 disciples of Grandmaster Zi Cheng had always enjoyed a close relationship, so their disciples would also frequently mingle with each other. Because Liu Xing was close in age to Zhu Zijuan, and because their personalities were similar, they had naturally become very good friends. They weren't distant with each other because of their difference in seniority. Liu Xing had come here representing Xiao Lixing to congratulate Zhu Zijuan. Because he had been caught up with some matters while traveling here, he had only arrived during dawn today. He had initially wanted to seek Zhu Zijuan to chit-chat and pick up girls, yet he discovered that Zhu Zijuan had already left Guanhua City. This had astonished him greatly. Even if Zhu Zijuan needed to leave, he should have done so after the conclusion of the celebration, right? Only afterward did he learn of the reason why. As it turned out, Zhu Zijuan hadn't wanted to leave himself. Instead, he had been forced away by someone. The perpetrator in question was none other than Ling Han, his new and unexpected fourth uncle. Just who in the world was this person? A stupid brat wanted to become his senior uncle? Liu Xing was a prodigy in cultivation, so even though he was still young, he was still referred to as uncle, senior uncle, or even ancestral uncle by many older alchemists. This was something that he had always been proud of and smug about. However, who would have thought that he would one day need to refer to a younger person as fourth uncle? He was extremely displeased about this. Moreover, he was also feeling extremely angry for his friend. Thus, Liu Xing especially walked over to obstruct Ling Han. As a junior, he naturally didn't dare to curse and slander Ling Han. However, he naturally had other methods to humiliate him. Upon hearing this, Ling Han took an extra glance at Liu Xing, and said, no need for such formalities. Fuck. I never paid my respects to you at all. What do you mean no need for such formalities? Liu Xing gasped in his mind. No wonder Zhu Zijuan had been forced to leave by him. Just look at Ling Han. His tongue was already so toxic, so his heart was definitely rotten to the core. Fourth uncle is truly successful for his young age. By the looks of it, fourth uncle is no older than 100,000 years old, am I right? An artificial smile spread across his face as he purposefully flattered Ling Han. The more he flattered Ling Han, the more painful his fall from grace would be. According to the normal flow of time, Ling Han was only around 200 years old. Cultivating under the reincarnation tree wouldn't age his physical body. However, after entering the time cultivation chambers, the Black Tower could also accelerate time by 1,000-fold. Thus, his true age right now was already in excess of 10,000 years. This was reflected in his flame of life. Although it was still raging and extremely lively, one could still discern the marks left by time. Of course, in the celestial realm, 10,000 years was nothing more than the blink of an eye. The age of elites was often calculated in tens of billions of years or even hundreds of billions of years. Hunyo glared at Liu Xing, and said, Oi, your smile is so fake. I urge you to stop smiling. Otherwise, Nyo will smash you into smithereens. She still maintained her innocent nature, and she was as naive and innocent as a child. Of course, this was apart from wanting to have children with Ling Han. Thus, she would directly speak her mind whenever she came across something that she didn't like. She wouldn't hide her emotions, and she more so wouldn't feign politeness. Liu Xing involuntarily faltered upon hearing this. Hunyou's aura was far too overwhelming, and just her glare alone was enough to make his hair stand on ends. He almost wet his pants in fright. He was a prodigy in alchemy, but he didn't have any talent in cultivation. He wasn't even a king tier. Thus, how could he possibly withstand Hunyou's aura? After regaining his composure, he purposefully raised his voice, and said, "I've admired Fourth Uncle for a long time, so I want to seek some advice from Fourth Uncle regarding some difficult problems in alchemy." Since they were conversing in a corner, others wouldn't have noticed them before. However, by raising his voice, Liu Xing instantly attracted the attention of many people. Zhu Feng was a 4-star Grandmaster. Although the holy land of alchemy in the Eastern Celestial Realm was Alchemy City, this didn't imply that there weren't alchemists in other places. On the contrary, each place would have its own alchemists. It was just that 99% of these alchemists belonged to Alchemy City. Only very few of them were independent. For example, Zhu Feng resided in Guanhua City. First of all, he could receive protection from the Universal Cloud's Celestial King. Second of all, it was comparatively easier to obtain celestial medicines in a Celestial King tier force. Thus, this kind of celebration was more enticing to alchemists. In the eyes of alchemists, advancing from the 5th refinement to the 6th refinement was a glorious achievement to be worshipped. Anyhow, who was Liu Xing? Many people recognized him. He was an outstanding disciple of Xiao Lixing. Even though he hadn't practiced alchemy for many years, he had already advanced to become a 2-star alchemist. He had more so reached the 3rd spirit refinement, so he definitely had a huge chance to become an alchemy grandmaster in the future. Even Liu Xing had to refer to this person as uncle, so didn't this imply that he was a 4-star grandmaster? They definitely had to seize this opportunity to admire this grandmaster. However, when they looked over, they didn't see anyone who looked like a grandmaster. Apart from Liu Xing, there was another young man as well as 4 young women. Apart from being handsome and beautiful, neither of them looked like a 4-star grandmaster. However, those 4 women were truly very beautiful. Their beauty was about to melt everyone's heart. Right now, Liu Xing was looking at that young man. Gasp! That young man is actually Liu Xing's senior uncle. Is that even possible? Ling Han gazed at Liu Xing, only to see a hint of disdain in his eyes. He instantly understood that seeking advice was only an excuse. In reality, Liu Xing wanted to force him into a difficult situation. As a junior, he could naturally seek advice from his senior. However, this was also dependent on the situation, no? Moreover, a junior couldn't force their seniors to answer their questions. Whether or not the seniors answered was completely up to them. However, Liu Xing had purposefully raised his voice and attracted the attention of many people. If Ling Han refuted him now, it was inevitable that he would tarnish his reputation. This only seemed like a small matter, yet it was a clear reflection of Liu Xing's malicious intentions. "Fourth uncle, you're not afraid, are you?" Liu Xing asked. He laid another trap, preventing Ling Han from retreating. He was feeling extremely smug in his mind. "You dared to bully my brother, so just see how I dispose of you. Moreover, I'm doing everything within the rules, so who can accuse me of anything?" Ling Han smiled calmly, and said, "Seniors naturally have a responsibility to explain difficult questions to juniors. What don't you understand? Ask away. This is child's play. Do you think you can stump me just because I'm a 2-star alchemist at the 3rd refinement? Quite the contrary." Ling Han possessed a reincarnation tree, so his theoretical knowledge was extremely vast and rich. He was simply lacking in practical experience. Liu Xing's smile grew even wider, and he said, "I've been refining the 4 forms bone transformation pill recently, and I'm slightly confused about the proportions of ingredients and how they should be used together. Can Fourth Uncle please explain this for me?" Everyone shook their heads upon hearing this. Just how many alchemical pills existed in the world? In fact, even 4-star grandmasters could only refine a relatively small percentage of alchemical pills. This was because mastering a new alchemical pill would take far too much time. Ling Han was so young, and it was likely that he hadn't even become a 2-star alchemist yet. Right now, however, Liu Xing was actually asking him about a 3-star alchemical pill. Wasn't he purposefully putting Ling Han in a difficult spot? Anyhow, Liu Xing's question about proportions was still okay. As long as one had read over the pill recipe before, this shouldn't be a problem. The memory of Celestials was naturally very good. However, to explain the details of how each ingredient should be used together, this was far too difficult. If one hadn't mastered the pill recipe, how could they explain this? Chapter 1953, Bring Me Tea, Massage My Back. Chapter 1953, Bring Me Tea, Massage My Back. Everyone turned their gaze to Ling Han. They were waiting to see how he would reply. If everything went as they expected, he would go beet red in the face, and then stomp off in anger and embarrassment. However, Ling Han's expression remained calm and composed. At the same time, he couldn't help but muse at this coincidence in his mind. This was because he had also started to investigate 3-star alchemical pills recently. He was investigating 5 in total, and one of them was none other than the 4 forms bone transformation pill. You've gifted this to me on a platter. Ling Han purposefully pondered for a moment, and it was as if he were racking his brains for an answer. Fourth uncle, it can't be that you don't even know about the 4 forms bone transformation pill, right? Liu Xing immediately said. This was a vicious blow. Now, hurry up and scurry off. Ling Han smiled calmly before finding a seat, and saying, before asking your seniors for advice, shouldn't you offer them some tea? TSK. You're even putting on airs now. Liu Xing chuckled coldly in his mind. In his eyes, Ling Han was trying to put him in a difficult spot instead. His intention was to wriggle free from his difficult situation. This was called defending by attacking. You have some skills. However, it's a shame that you've already fallen into my trap. How can I let you jump out? Yes, yes. Liu Xing answered with an expression of respect. He commanded the servants in the room to pour some tea, which he then brought forward for Ling Han. He appeared as respectful as could be. See, my performance is flawless, and there's nothing you can complain about. More and more people gathered in the surroundings. Some were simply here to see a show, while others were here because they were curious about Ling Han. They wanted to see if he was genuinely a skilled alchemist. After all, he was Xiao Lixing's junior brother, so he couldn't be underestimated. Ling Han crossed his legs before reaching forward with his right hand. Veins bulged on Liu Xing's forehead, yet he still gritted his teeth and bowed down as he placed the cup of tea in Ling Han's hand. I'll let you be smug for now. In a moment, I'll see how you cry. Ling Han started to slowly sip the tea. By doing this, he wasn't necessarily trying to mock Liu Xing. Instead, he was also recalling the refinement technique of the 4 forms bone transformation pill in his mind. This was a process of carefully thinking over the problem. After all, he had also just started to learn about this alchemical pill. His understanding of it was astonishing, yet he was still relatively lacking in practical experience. Regarding some detailed problems, he genuinely had to refine the alchemical pill himself before he could get a solid grasp on them. He was the alchemy emperor, so after pondering over this question for a moment, he was already confident that he could give a satisfactory answer. However, he still continued to slowly sip his tea in a leisurely manner. In fact, he appeared so relaxed that many people wanted to punch him. Others might not know, but Liu Xing was definitely feeling extremely frustrated at this moment. Ling Han was definitely doing this on purpose. He was forcing him to bow and nod like an obedient servant. To say nothing of the bulging veins on Liu Xing's forehead, even the surrounding onlookers were starting to become impatient. You're just drinking tea, so is there really any need to blow it 10 times before each sip? Will the tea burn you to death if you blow it fewer times? You're a severing mundane tear cultivator. If you're truly burnt by tea, then won't that be a massive joke? I'll endure this, I'll endure this, I'll endure this. Liu Xing continued to repeat in his mind. As long as he endured this, it would soon be time for Ling Han to make a fool of himself. However, he hadn't expected Ling Han's counterattack to be so precise and ruthless. He had forced him to act like a servant in public. This was far too embarrassing. However, now that it had already come to this, he was naturally even more unwilling to give up. He could only grit his teeth and persist. After a long while, Ling Han finally finished drinking his tea. Liu Xing breathed a sigh of relief. The surrounding onlookers also heaved a sigh of relief. Ling Han was far too good at building up suspense. Ling Han handed the empty cup to Liu Xing, and Liu Xing naturally accepted it with respect. He then said, "Fourth uncle. My back is feeling a bit tight, help me massage it." Fuck. Liu Xing felt a strong urge to kill someone. Flames were about to erupt from his eyes. However, he gritted his teeth and continued to console himself, telling himself that he couldn't abandon all of his previous hard work. Otherwise, he would truly become a servant for nothing. He walked behind Ling Han. Thump, thump, thump. He started to massage Ling Han's back. The Empress, Hu Niu, and the others were all wearing faint smiles. This person actually dared to challenge Ling Han? Didn't he know that Ling Han had been trained by the large black dog? Liu Xing was truly starting to feel some slight regret now. He had yet to humiliate Ling Han, and yet he was already being toyed around with. He was genuinely worried about whether his heart could take this any longer. However, he had already reached such a point, so how could he give up halfway? He forcefully suppressed the flames of raging fury in his heart. He was eagerly awaiting the time when Ling Han finally made a complete fool of himself. This was also the motivation that allowed him to endure this humiliation before so many people. Go on. Continue with your arrogance. After massaging Ling Han's back for a long time, Liu Xing forcefully suppressed his anger, and asked, "Fourth uncle, are you satisfied now?" "My legs," Ling Han said in a relaxed voice. "Fuck your mom. Don't need massaging," Ling Han continued. Liu Xing almost choked upon hearing this. "If you don't need it, then you don't need it. What's the point of specially mentioning it? Are you trying to frighten me to death?" "Then fourth uncle, can you answer my question now?" he asked in a respectful voice. However, he was actually gritting his teeth in anger. Ling Han coughed, and said, "My throat seems to be slightly parched again." Liu Xing's face involuntarily twitched when he heard this. His fists were clenched, and he could barely stop himself from punching Ling Han in the face. Ling Han looked as detestable as could be. "Forget about it. You've also worked very hard," Ling Han said. Liu Xing finally regained some composure upon hearing this. If Ling Han had truly ordered him to bring another cup of tea over, he would have definitely jumped up in arms. "Okay, let's talk about the refinement of the Four Forms Bone Transformation Pill now," Ling Han said with a smile. He stopped toying around with Liu Xing. In his eyes, this was only a minigame before the grand celebration. He would use it to pass some time. His expression became solemn, and he started to explain the refinement process. In the beginning, everyone was looking on with a faint smile. They were treating this as nothing more than a show. However, as time went on, their expressions gradually became serious. Ling Han explained profound concepts in simple and understandable terms, and his explanation of the refinement process of the Four Forms Bone Transformation Pill was extremely in-depth and engrossing. Everyone nodded as they listened to him, and they felt as if they could immediately succeed in refining the Four Forms Bone Transformation Pill if they were to try. Even Liu Xing's heart started to thump in excitement. Even though he had asked this question to screw with Ling Han, he did indeed have many confusions about refining the Four Forms Bone Transformation Pill. Right now, however, all of his questions were being answered by Ling Han. Ling Han continued to speak, and everyone's expression continued to become increasingly earnest. This was because Ling Han's explanation had already exceeded the realm of simply talking about the Four Forms Bone Transformation Pill. Indeed, he was already starting to explain other domains of alchemy. He was talking about the entirety of alchemy. Ling Han still had yet to become a grandmaster in alchemy. At most, he could only be considered as a small fry. However, he had already incorporated his own understandings while learning spirit refinement, and this had allowed him to forge his own path. Even though this path was still in its infancy, its foundation was much stronger than what most other people possessed. Right now, he was expounding these most fundamental principles. Everyone understood the fundamentals. However, few people could gain a deep and comprehensive understanding of them. "Hurry, come over here, there's a grandmaster explaining alchemy." Brother Fan, Hurry up and come here. Otherwise, you'll regret this forever. Lin Chen. Hurry up and call your senior brothers and junior brothers over. The surrounding alchemists hurriedly retrieved their transmission devices to call their friends and disciples over. To alchemists, this was definitely a grand gathering that they couldn't miss. This was an incredible opportunity for them to elevate their skills and understanding of alchemy. This was because most alchemists didn't need to learn about difficult or profound concepts of alchemy. Instead, they would see bigger improvements by simply reinforcing the fundamentals. Thus, more and more people gathered in the surroundings, causing the small area to become so packed that not even a drop of water could trickle through. Chapter 1954 Revered by Everyone. Chapter 1954 Revered by Everyone. Some people were unaware of this situation, so they couldn't help but falter upon walking over. What's going on? Why are there so many people? Cultivators naturally had no interest in alchemy. They couldn't understand Ling Han's utterances, either. Thus, they would immediately turn around and leave. However, it was a completely different story for alchemists. They were immediately engrossed by Ling Han's explanations, and they would involuntarily sit down to carefully listen to his remarks. This was a very strange scene. There was clearly a sea of people, yet the surroundings were especially quiet and tranquil. Apart from Ling Han's voice, no one else made any sound. They all wore expressions of respect and reverence as they fervently gazed at Ling Han. It was as if they were worshipping a divine deity. In some sense, Ling Han was indeed a god in alchemy. Only when the grand ceremony was about to begin did Ling Han finally conclude his explanation. Everyone stood up with an expression of yearning. Regardless of who it was, they all bowed deeply to Ling Han. Even 3-star alchemists were no exception. In terms of grasping the fundamentals, Ling Han's understanding had already exceeded that of most 3-star alchemists. Thus, even 3-star alchemists had learned a lot by listening to his explanations. As such, they couldn't help but pay Ling Han their highest respects. They were convinced that Ling Han would definitely become a grandmaster in the future. In fact, he might even create history and fill the gap in alchemy in the Eastern Celestial Realm. He might become the first 5-star alchemist in 100 billion years. They couldn't help but go numb with excitement upon thinking of this. Perhaps today's gathering would also be recorded in history forever, representing Ling Han's initial rise in the celestial realm. Liu Xing was left wide-eyed with shock and disbelief. He had come here to humiliate Ling Han, yet after half a day, he had instead given Ling Han a chance to gain fame and renown. Just look. Just how popular and reputable was Ling Han now? Just how foolish had Liu Xing been? Just how incredibly foolish had he been? It was actually he who had pushed Ling Han onto this divine pedestal. He was so vexed that his mouth was about to go crooked. Pa. At this moment, he suddenly felt a heavy weight landing on his shoulder. He looked over, only to see a hand. Live an honest life, and focus more of your attention on alchemy. Cultivate your heart, and learn to be a decent person, Ling Han said. This was a piece of advice from the bottom of his heart. He wasn't a petty person. Liu Xing was already working toward becoming a 3-star alchemist at such a young age, and this was something that was worthy of praise. Thus, he advised Liu Xing to cultivate his heart and personality now. Otherwise, if Liu Xing hadn't been so talented, he wouldn't have even wasted his breath. He would have directly pummeled Liu Xing into smithereens. Liu Xing flushed red with embarrassment, and he didn't dare to look Ling Han in the eyes. Ling Han patted Liu Xing's shoulders again before confidently striding away. He didn't pay any more attention to him. Grandmaster Ling. Wherever Ling Han passed, the surrounding alchemists would all look over and greet him with a sincere smile. Even though Ling Han was still very far away from becoming a grandmaster, his explanations just then had elicited a strong feeling of respect from everyone. He was a selfless person, and he had shared his understanding of alchemy with everyone else. He had allowed all of them to reap huge benefits. Zhu Feng's 2 senior brothers had also personally come to congratulate him on reaching the 6th refinement. They pulled Ling Han over to chit-chat with him, mainly asking about how Grandmaster Zi Cheng was currently doing. Among Ling Han's 3 senior brothers, the older they were, the smaller their achievements in alchemy. For example, even though both his first senior brother and second senior brother were 4-star alchemists, they had only mastered the 5th spirit refinement, and had just barely entered the realm of grandmasters. Zhongning, Ling Han's first senior brother, most likely wouldn't be able to reach the 6th refinement. Meanwhile, Xiao Lixing, his second senior brother, still had a sliver of hope. However, it was actually Zhu Feng, his third senior brother, who had successfully taken this step first. He had already mastered the 6th refinement. Ling Han chit-chatted with his 3 senior brothers for a long time. Afterward, Zhongning and Xiao Lixing both invited Ling Han to their residences. Ling Han happily accepted their invitations. However, regarding when he would visit them, this was hard to say. After all, he was also a very busy person. The grand celebration continued for 5 entire days. When it concluded, Ling Han hurriedly set off again, with his destination being the Three Blooms Valley. Strictly speaking, the Three Blooms Valley belonged inside the territory of the Calm Peace Heaven. However, wherever there were borders, there were naturally conflicts over claims. Moreover, the Three Blooms Valley was on the outer edge of the Calm Peace Heaven, so it was only natural that it was disputed by the bordering heaven. Otherwise, the celestial king of the wide prosperity heaven wouldn't have accidentally discovered the Three Blooms Valley and the fiery flame lightning strike would. Ling Han and the others set off, and bewitching maiden Ru continued to shamelessly travel with them. This caused Hunyo to continually glare at her. How could there be such a shameless person? If it weren't for the Empress stopping her, she would truly want to pummel bewitching maiden Ru into a pig head. She would then toss her as far away as she could. Under Hunyo's disdain, the group of them traversed through mountains and waters for almost 3 months. Only then did they finally exit the wide prosperity heaven and return to the Calm Peace Heaven. They then continued westward for another month before finally arriving at the Three Blooms Valley. Is this truly a valley? Ling Han gazed at the swarming clouds and mists before him. This valley was as vast as a sea, and there was simply no end in sight. The clouds and mists were like the waves of the sea, slightly undulating as they flowed. This was a magnificent sight. Among this vast sea, one could see 3 distinct mountain peaks. They looked much like 3 blooming petals, and it was from this that the Three Blooms Valley had received its name. Boom! A wave suddenly crashed over from the distance. This was a gust of wind. Upon wrapping around a cloud, it formed a peculiar and spectacular spectacle. However, the expressions of Ling Han and the others involuntarily changed. This gust of wind was far too terrifying. There were symbols of the great Tao swarming inside it, with each of them being paramount and profound. These were symbols that could easily shatter the heavens. Celestial king symbols, they all exclaimed in astonishment. No wonder the eternal prosperity celestial king had said that even celestial kings couldn't forcefully obtain the rare opportunity of this place. Just a simple gust of wind was already like the frenzied attack of a celestial king. Even an ascending origin tier elite would instantly die upon coming into contact with such a gust of wind. As for celestial kings, they wouldn't know which heaven these gusts of wind were equivalent to. In any case, only 9th heaven celestial kings could laugh before the might of heaven and earth and peer down on all matter. Only they could enjoy equal standing with the Tao of heaven and earth. Ling Han and the others attempted to enter the valley, yet symbols of the great Tao would flash into appearance from time to time. These symbols were powerful enough to obliterate all matter, so Ling Han and the others naturally didn't dare to recklessly push forward. Right now, no one could enter this valley. Celestial kings could most likely enter this valley, but they definitely couldn't venture into its depths, either. The will of heaven and earth was transcendent above all matter. According to rumors, there were very specific ways to enter this valley. One couldn't find any random place to jump down. There were petrifying regulations of gravity here, and the bottom of the valley was more so filled with a forest of razor-sharp stones that was imbued with the symbols of the great Tao. If one were impaled, they would instantly die on the spot. Even a physique as freakish as Ling Han's would be useless. Thus, they definitely had to find the correct entrance. Only by following this path could they safely arrive at the bottom of the valley. At that time, they could then look for the fiery flame lightning strike wood. After walking around for several days, Ling Han and the others finally found the correct entrance. At this moment, many people had already arrived before this entrance. Some of them Ling Han recognized, while some of them he didn't recognize. Brother Ling, Yang Xianlu and Liu Jie called as they walked over in unison. When they noticed each other, they couldn't help but falter and look over. What's going on? Why is he also greeting Ling Han? Ling Han smiled and said, Brother Yang, Brother Liu. Huh? Brother Ling, how do you know him? Yang Xianlu and Liu Jie asked in unison. Ling Han smiled and said, I took a trip to Guanhua City, and I became acquainted with Brother Liu there. What? You're genuinely from the calm peace heaven? At this moment, Liu Jie naturally understood everything. He immediately recalled Ling Han insisting that he was from the calm peace heaven. At that time, no one had believed him. In fact, even he had thought that Ling Han was purposefully making up an excuse to turn down his offer. He had even been slightly displeased at that time. However, who would have thought that this was actually true? Gasp. Chapter 1955, Shishouwen arrives. Chapter 1955, Shishouwen arrives. Brother Ling, you really are from the calm peace heaven? Liu Jie still asked, unwilling to give up. Ling Han nodded, and replied, as true as can be. Liu Jie's eyes flickered, and after a while, he only darkly said, then, after we enter the valley, it is inevitable that we will be on opposing sides. I will definitely not hold anything back. What is it? You want to fight? Hunyo immediately piped in. Her attitude was very fierce. Liu Jie opened his mouth to say something, but then closed his mouth again. In front of Hunyo, he really was not qualified to make any outlandish boasts. He looked deeply at Ling Han, and then turned around and left. Just as he had said, should they meet inside the valley, it was unavoidable that they would have a great battle. You seem to have gained his resentment. Yang Xianlu asked. Ling Han broke into a smile, and said, it cannot be helped. Just let him be. What happened? Yang Xianlu asked again. Ling Han stroked his chin, and smilingly replied, it's complicated. They were just talking when Liu Han suddenly ran over, and said to Hunyo, even if you are a woman, I still want to be with you. Pu, Yang Xianlu immediately spluttered. Even though he was known as a divine fetus that had been born on the celestial path, and was as calm and steady as a mountain, all of that had turned completely into nothing at this moment. He coughed endlessly, looked at Hunyo, and then looked at Liu Han again, feeling completely blown over. Could it be that because it had been too long since he had roamed around, he was already outdated, and could no longer keep up with the trends? You are so annoying. Hunyo declared impatiently. I know of a type of celestial medicine that can change gender, Liu Han said excitedly. I have thought it over for many days. I like you, and I can't give up on you. Nyo doesn't like you. Hunyo grabbed one of Ling Han's arms. Nyo likes Ling Han, and only Ling Han alone. Ling Han. Liu Han's eyes swept over, focusing on Ling Han's face. Her expression instantly became icy cold, exuding a frosty killing intent. Since that was the case, then she would kill Ling Han off first. Ugly, do you want to die? Hunyo, too, immediately blazed with killing intent. She was the most sensitive to killing intent. This ugly hag actually dared to show killing intent towards her Ling Han. Her first reaction was to kill her. Liu Han controlled her emotions, and only shot Hunyo a dazzling smile before leaving without a second look backwards. She would kill Ling Han, but she would not do it herself. It would be too easy to do this. She only had to egg on the other monarchs to make a move, and with her beauty and status, it was completely a piece of cake for her to make others bite the bait. Yang Xianlu smirked, and asked, have I missed something? It was no wonder that Ling Han said it was complicated. It indeed seemed extremely complex. Laro Song and Shan Jitong also arrived consequently. The monarchs from the calm peace heaven had all arrived, but because there was a larger number of monarchs from the wide prosperity heaven. At present, only half had arrived, and they were all ranked below the top 10. Even so, when over a dozen monarchs arrived at the same time, all of them exuded the kind of aura that came from a ruler of their own domain, capable of causing one to submit to them. In the future, these people would definitely become celestial kings, so naturally their aura soared. The two sides were clearly divided, and stood on either side of the entrance. Conflict did not erupt, nor did any immortal palace tier and ascending origin tier elites appear to create a massacre, and ruin the many prodigies that had been accumulated for at least 10 billion years. The journey to this mystery realm could involve a great many celestial kings. Whoever dared to cause trouble here would simply commit a suicidal action. Thus, the battles this time would only take place among the severing mundane tiers. Roar. A loud battle cry rang out, just like the roar of a dragon, but also seemingly like a tiger's roar, so loud that even the mist in the valley vibrated endlessly. A young man was rushing over from the distance. His appearance was extremely primitive, with only a fur hide wrapped around his lower body. His hair had been tied into several dozen braids, each braid tied with an ornament that was made from a jade-colored bone. He was clearly only just one person, but as he ran over, it was like a frightening giant primeval beast bulldozing over. Any person or object that stood in his way would only be sent flying and shattered. Shishouwen. Yang Xianlu stood abruptly, his hands involuntarily tightening into fists. His eyes blazed with fire, his fighting spirit burning brightly. This person was Shishouwen. Ling Han took a second glance at that savage, but as his gaze focused, it immediately drew the attention of the other. Shishouwen also turned to look at Ling Han, his eyes as sharp as blades that slashed rapidly towards Ling Han. Ling Han was completely unconcerned, but a divine sword leaped out of his eyes, greeting the other's incoming attack. Boom! Sword rays clashed, simultaneously erasing each other. This clash seemed to have resulted in a tie. Shishouwen bared his mouth in a grin. He had only used 1% of his battle prowess in this blow, but he was sure that the battle prowess that Ling Han had used was definitely more than that. Hence, it was natural that he was the one who was superior. All of a sudden, his vicious nature exploded. With him sweeping his gaze over everyone that was looking at him, a bout of muffled grunts instantly rang out. Even monarch tiers were no exception. They all turned their heads away, feeling a fierce pain in their eyes, while king tiers and emperor tiers directly cried tears of blood. In the severing mundane tier, the superiority of monarch tier over emperor tier was the heaviest, which was equivalent to a young soul against the fourth severance. Hence, even if they were emperor tiers, it was very normal that they still could not sustain the might of a glare from him. This guy was a little similar to Hu Niu, extremely vicious and filled with a primitive air. Shan Jitong and Laro Song couldn't help but feel their heads go numb. So this was a monarch tier of the wide prosperity heaven? Too powerful. Facing Yang Xianlu, even if they were no match for him, they at least had the courage to fight. At least they could be sure that even if they were no match for him, they would still be able to calmly retreat after the battle. But against Shishouwen, they were like lambs that had encountered a fierce lion, only worthy of becoming his prey. Even the two of them, monarch tiers, were like this, what more the others? All of them had lost all their drive, and could only tremble in fear. This kind of person. How were they supposed to match that? Moreover, Shishouwen was only ranked 9th among the prodigies of the wide prosperity heaven, so what about the 8 people ranked higher than him? It was said that the top 3 were all freakish prodigies, and could single-handedly destroy the heavens, and were indescribably powerful. My hand is itching, who will fight me? Shishouwen called out loudly. While he was asking who would fight him, his eyes were fixed on Ling Han. In his eyes, only this person could barely stand against him in battle, and stepping on prodigies had always been his hobby. Delivering a blow to his opponent that would render his confidence to bits was one of his greatest pleasures. Wild ape, Niu will come and beat you up. Hu Niu leaped out. She was not the type to care about any form of rules, and would rather move directly. Boom, an image of the rock appeared behind her. Immediately, she was using her full power. Clearly, Hu Niu was also excited by the thrill of battle, and gave Shishouwen serious regard, treating him like a powerful opponent. So strong. Shishouwen exclaimed in surprise, delighted. He gave a roar, and stepped up to meet Hu Niu midway. With a tremble of his figure, a massive golden giant appeared behind him. It was brandishing a stone pestle that harshly crashed towards the rock. This was a clash between the power of divine fetus of both sides. From a certain perspective, this was a clash between two celestial kings as well, though both had just released a sliver of their full might. The heights of the celestial king tier did determine the strength of the divine fetus, but it was also affected by the cultivator's own cultivation level. It was impossible that an ascending origin tier divine fetus would be no match for a severing mundane tier divine fetus. Boom, the giant clashed against the rock, bursting into an intense confrontation. Great Tao shattered, turning into countless fragments of seals that shot out in all directions. Brilliant light filled the skies, and nothing else could be seen. Chapter 1956, Boost of Fortune. Chapter 1956, Boost of Fortune. Xiao, two figures shot out of the blazing light while still fighting an incredibly intense battle. Every time they clashed, it would cause great Tao to vibrate, the mist to ripple, and a myriad of sights to appear. Ha 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 ha, great. Xiaowen laughed madly, his braids dancing, his muscles bulging as multiple ancient seals appeared. That was his divine fetus showing its might, boosting his boundless power, as if he could split open the skies and break open the ground. He was a member of the Golden Giant race. When the world first began, a great many source beasts were birthed. At the same time, a large number of human-shaped beings also appeared, such as the Bronze Giant, Golden Giant, and Thunder Giant. These existences naturally were also celestial king tier level. However, with the long passage of time, some were still alive, while others had died in battle, and still others had gone missing. For example, the Golden Giant race. The ancestor of this race had gone missing. No one knew if he was dead or alive. It was as if he had completely vanished off of the face of this world. But this did not affect the strength of his descendants. Once their bloodline awakened, they would become a divine fetus, and would be able to use the superpowers of the Golden Giant and possess boundless strength. At the same time, they also had astonishing defense. Xiaowen roared loudly, activating his ancient power, and pushing his battle prowess to its limit. Fight! Hunyo had also been spurred on by the battle. The image of the rock manifested endlessly, and looked like it was actually about to solidify. A massive rock had really appeared. As its wings flapped, its brilliance dazzled the ages. At this moment, both of them were caught in an irresolvable battle. What? Seeing such an intense scene of battle, whether they were the cultivators of the wide prosperity heaven or calm peace heaven, they all revealed an expression of shock and disbelief. Those from the wide prosperity heaven did not dare believe this reality. That was because they were too confident in themselves, and thought that any one of the monarch tiers from their side would be able to easily defeat the severing mundane tiers from the calm peace heaven, but now there was actually a young girl that could fight Xiaowen to a stalemate. This naturally stunned them. It should be known that while Xiaowen was ranked 9th, from 10th to 4th, their strength was actually very close. In fact, it was possible that Xiaowen might be even stronger than the 4th. That was because when Xiaowen had been in the ranking battles, he had lost his first battle to the heaven-defying freak that had eventually claimed the first place, so the former was heavily injured. And that was why he had repeatedly lost in the subsequent battles, finally falling into 9th place. But even then, he still wasn't the 10th, which was proof of exactly how strong Xiaowen was. And those from the calm peace heaven also could not believe it. That was because a great many of them had heard that Hunyo had once defeated Yang Xianlu, Shan Jitong, and Laro Song. She was definitely the strongest of the severing mundane tier of the calm peace heaven, but she was actually unable to suppress the 9th strongest of the wide prosperity heaven. But after they had exchanged more than 1,000 moves, the difference between them was shown. Hunyo had the upper hand. Her hands were formed into claws, and as she brandished the seal of the rock, her destructive power was incredibly terrifying. Even if Xiaowen had extremely strong defense as the Golden Giant divine fetus, he was still mauled under her sharp claws. What was astonishing was the fact that the blood that Xiaowen shed was actually also golden. It was like liquid metal. The moment it landed on the ground, it solidified. Someone had even picked it up, and shockingly uncovered that this was actually pseudo-divine metal. This race was indeed astonishing. Liquid pseudo-divine metal was actually flowing in their veins, so their physique was extraordinarily terrifying. However, what was even more frightening was Hunyosha was actually capable of tearing through this kind of physique with her bare hands. Just how astonishing was this little girl's destructive power? Ha 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 ha, you are the first woman that has managed to wound me. Shoshowan laughed raucously, and did not panic or lose his fighting spirit in the slightest just because he had been injured or had fallen into a disadvantage. On the other hand, his fighting spirit was soaring endlessly. Thus, I have decided to make you my woman. His fighting spirit blazed, turning into a hot cloud of volcanic ash. With its support, that golden giant became even mightier, a seal on its chest exuding blazing light, as if it had turned into a sun, and no one could look directly at it. This was a real prodigy. When met with a strong opponent, not only would they not retreat, but would instead improve themselves, and break through their limits, pushing their battle prowess which might seem like there was no way of improving further a step further. Hunyo also flew into a thunderous rage, and declared, "Nyo is Ling Han's. You wild ape actually dare have designs on Nyo, Nyo is going to beat you to burst." Boom, her battle prowess also increased madly. Multiple veins appeared, and then suddenly struck out towards Shoshowan with a sweep. The great battle continued. Though Shoshowan had broken through his own limits, Hunyo was also a battle maniac. She similarly could break through her limits, and thus it was still Shoshowan that was being suppressed. However, though Shoshowan looked like he was about to lose, who knew if he had a frightening ultimate move that could turn the tables? Thus, falling from a disadvantageous position to a true defeat was definitely not something that could be done in a short while. Ling Han nodded. No wonder Yang Xianlu was no match for Shoshowan. In truth, it was already very extraordinary that Yang Xianlu had managed to keep his life in the battle with Shoshowan. However, if it had to be said that Yang Xianlu was inferior to Shoshowan in physique, battle talent, and celestial technique, Ling Han would definitely disagree. The reason could only be the eternal prosperity Celestial King's judgment that Yang Xianlu had conveyed. The wide prosperity heaven had gained a boost of fortune from the heaven and earth. Thus, this generation's young prodigies were much stronger than those from calm peace heaven. Shoshowan's strength, even in the western celestial realm, could probably be ranked among the top in the severing mundane tier. That was because Hunyo was such an existence herself, and he was only slightly inferior to her. Shan Jitong and Larosong were both captivated, and had a feeling of despondency that they could not describe. They were indeed slightly inferior to Yang Xianlu, but everyone knew that Yang Xianlu had been birthed on the celestial path. Moreover, he had a master that was an eighth heaven celestial king, so even if they were inferior, they could still accept that. Furthermore, after advancing into the celestial king tier, the gap in physique would be leveled out. They were sure that they could catch up to him, and Yang Xianlu would no longer be able to shine all by himself ahead of them. But when they saw Hunyo and Shoshowan's battle, their confidence had collapsed. They were all monarch tiers here, but the size of this gap could drive anyone to despair. Was the difference in physique really so obvious? Absolutely impossible. Thus, even if they had all become celestial kings, they would still be unable to match Hunyo and Shoshowan. At most, they would only be able to manage a few counters before being defeated. The intense battle was still continuing, and more monarch tiers had also arrived. They naturally were from the wide prosperity heaven. When they saw Hunyo and Shoshowan's battle, they all looked grim. Shoshowan was stronger than he had been in the ranking battles, but this young girl was freakishly powerful. Who was she? Where had she popped out from? After fighting for a whole 3 days, Shoshowan finally was still no match for Hunyo, and stepped out of the battle. "You are indeed stronger than I am," he declared loudly, but did not lose his confidence just because he had lost one battle. Instead, his vitality and energy both soared to the peak. "Within 100 years, I will seek you out for another battle. By then, I will defeat you so that you will obediently become my woman." After he said this, he turned around and left, not giving Hunyo the opportunity to rage. Hunyo was outraged, and was just about to set off in pursuit when Ling Han pulled her back. He shook his head at her, and said, "The next time he appears, I will beat him into a pig head so that he will never dare to be carried away by his delusions." Instantly, Hunyo was elated, wrapping her arm around Ling Han's arm, looking so completely innocent and lovable that anyone would want to spoil her. Chapter 1957, You Are Inferior to Shoshowan. Chapter 1957, You Are Inferior to Shoshowan. Immediately, a great many pairs of eyes looked over, their gaze fixed on Ling Han, looking envious. This young man was really too lucky. Hunyo was so strong that she could defeat even Shoshowan, and she herself was world-shakingly beautiful. With such a beautiful partner, what else could he ask for? Moreover, just look at how ferocious Hunyo was towards other people, but towards Ling Han, she was as soft and gentle as water. Really, they simply couldn't say anything else. Meanwhile, Liu Han's beautiful eyes were dark, and the gaze she fixed on Ling Han was filled with resentment. If this man did not exist, Hunyo would be hers. She only had to eat the heavenly yang herb, and then gender would no longer be a problem. It was this man that had separated her and Hunyo. He had to die. Ninth Sha is really so weak that he can't even defeat a piece of trash from the Calm Peace Heaven, a man who had arrived later scoffed. Seeing all those from Calm Peace Heaven look towards him, he proudly declared, I, Fei Yun, am ranked 6th among the severing mundane tiers of the wide prosperity heaven. 6. Though Hunyo had won, it had not been an easy win, and Shoshowan was only ranked 9th. Then just how powerful would the 6th be? Hunyo bared her teeth, wanting to make a move again. She had a powerful move she could use, capable of destroying anything, but she could only use it once in many, many days. If there was no other choice, she would definitely not use it. This was a real trump card that could save her life. Ling Han stretched out a hand and pulled her back, saying, I'll go. The Empress's fighting spirit also blazed fiercely, but seeing that Ling Han said that he would fight, she repressed her fighting spirit. Trash or otherwise, are you the one to decide? Ling Han strode out. Ha, who from the Calm Peace Heaven is not a piece of trash? Fei Yun's expression was filled with contempt. Why don't you all just attack together? Just see how I will suppress all of you. Arrogant, he was really too arrogant. Ling Han shook his head. What good was it to bicker with someone arrogant? Just beat him up. Come fight then. Trash or not, we should decide with our fist. Trash, if you want to be beaten up, I will oblige you. In a flash, Fei Yun had already shot over towards Ling Han. He did not care who else was around them, and simply blasted forwards with a punch. There was a vague seal of great Tao on his fist, exuding a brilliance that could shatter everything. Instantly, all those who were not monarch tiers turned around. Once the force of this punch escaped control, the destructive power would be too terrifying. Ling Han shook his head, and swiped out a finger. It was a simple action, but seemed capable of suppressing the heaven and earth. You dare look down on me? Fei Yun roared furiously, and that seal of great Tao on his fist also became increasingly distinct. Clearly, the destructive power had increased further. Ling Han smiled faintly, and greeted the incoming blow with a tap. Boom. The first time the two of them clashed, the finger and fist had not actually made direct contact. Instead, there was still a gap of at least 9 meters between them. An intense crash had already taken place between the great Tao and origin power of both sides, and one after another, frightening power and regulations surged out, radiating in all directions. The Emperor tiers that had just fled were carried away by this power, and they involuntarily swayed as if they were drunk. They couldn't help but feel shocked. This was only the difference between an Emperor tier and a monarch tier, so how could there be such a wide gap in their strength? This was natural. Both Ling Han and Fei Yun were in the 5th severance, which was equivalent to a Yang Soul elite, and their battle prowess was close to Yin Soul. How could severing mundane tier be able to easily sustain the shock waves that resulted from this level of attack? The fact that they had not been directly killed spoke of how strong these people were. Otherwise, if it had been normal 4th severances, they definitely would have been directly killed off. Ling Han withdrew his finger, and was extremely calm. That's all. Damn, you actually dare look down on me so much. Fei Yun's black locks danced, his fury rising to the point of madness. Ling Han shook his head. You have an overly high opinion of yourself. Your strength is completely inferior to Shoshoan's. The ranking could not truly determine the gap in strength. When he delivered this strike, he had taken his own measures. Fei Yun was inferior to Shoshoan. Previously, it was already said that Shoshoan had been ranked 9th because he had encountered that freak who had eventually gotten the first place in his first battle in the ranking battles. As a result, he had suffered a horrible defeat, and was severely injured. In the end, he could only be ranked 9th. Of course, this did not mean that Fei Yun was not strong. As a monarch tier, Fei Yun was naturally strong. Furthermore, he indeed could be ranked among the top 10 of the wide prosperity heaven. Compared to Shoshoan, there should not be too much of a gap, but how could top-tier prodigies afford that slight bit of a gap? After I beat you into dust, you will understand just how far the gap is between you and me. A black aura flowed out of Fei Yun's eyes, endlessly rising, and turning into a black scythe. Death scythe. Someone gasped in shock, and even his expression had taken a drastic change. It should be known that the speaker was an emperor tier himself. I really had not thought that Fei Yun would use the death scythe so quickly. A monarch tier sighed ruefully. Who asked that brat to have angered Fei Yun? Another monarch tier, meanwhile, delighted in the misery of others. In the first place, there was a direct competitive relationship among monarch tiers, and now it was an exchange between two great heavens, so naturally they hoped that Fei Yun could kill Ling Han. Fei Yun once again charged out. He had not yet arrived when the massive scythe behind him was already slashing over. It was clearly only an image, yet was exuding the cold light of metal, as if it was solid. Ling Han's right hand curled into a fist, and shot a punch at the air. Crack! As if a sudden bolt of lightning had struck out of the blow, creases then appeared in the space, wave after wave spreading out in all directions. The death scythe was immediately affected. Its course had been blocked, and then damage appeared. Flakes of rust emerged before they floated down. Finally, it turned into countless pieces, which were taken away by the winds. Hiss! Seeing the force of this punch, everyone inhaled sharply. Even the monarch tiers showed expressions of shock. It had been such a frightening blow from Fei Yun, and yet had been destroyed by a casual punch. Ling Han's strength was practically unfathomable. Good. Good. Hunyo immediately began to cheer. The Empress, meanwhile, clapped her hands. The two women would disregard everyone else, and do whatever they liked. For example, other women would probably now be embarrassed to cheer for their husband, right? But not them. As expected, you are inferior to Shoshoan, Ling Han said with certainty. Fei Yun's hands balled into fists. He was so furious that a vein popped out on his forehead. It was very rare for a prodigy like him to be angered by anything, but he very much valued his ranking. It was one of the reasons to motivate him to tirelessly work on his cultivation. Determination to become the strongest. But now, Ling Han had actually overlooked all his effort, actually thinking that he was inferior to even Shoshoan, who was ranked 9th. Then didn't that mean that he could only be ranked 10th? How could he tolerate that? You are courting your death, he said menacingly. His right hand shook, and a black scythe appeared, bearing a strong resemblance to the death scythe above his head. He used some kind of secret technique, and another image appeared, turning into a gigantic human figure that gripped that death scythe. Soul slash, he roared, waving the scythe in his hand, and above his head, that human figure also waved the death scythe. Wang, an indescribable bizarre shock wave swept towards Ling Han. En. Ling Han was slightly surprised. It is indeed a slash on the soul. This blow is purely regulations taking form in an attack, and can also completely ignore physical defense, reaching straight to the mind, striking the soul and eliminating it. Unfortunately, this force is too weak. Ling Han showed an expression of disappointment. Though Fei Yun was only slightly weaker than Shoshoan, this little bit of gap between them made him lose all his fighting spirit. He was just a piece of trash. Chapter 1958, Raped by a Spear. Chapter 1958, Raped by a Spear. Ling Han released a battle cry, his figure charging out, completely ignoring the soul slash that had been unleashed by the death scythe. Reckless and foolish. Fei Yun smirked coldly. The slash of the death scythe arrived. Wang, Ling Han's robes fluttered by themselves, and it was to a very great extent at that. A few corners of his robes had been directly torn, even. It should be known that the robes he was wearing were nothing ordinary, but rather something woven from the combination of pseudo-divine metal and divine silk, possessing astonishing defense, but now a corner of theirs had actually been torn. This really was extremely terrifying. But what was more terrifying was Ling Han. He charged over, completely unaffected, his punch aiming straight for Fei Yun's face. What? Fei Yun's mouth gaped, soundlessly saying this word, and his eyes were filled with a strong disbelief. How could Ling Han have blocked this blow so easily? But whether Fei Yun accepted it or not, and believed it or not, Ling Han's fist was already close at hand. Humph! Brandishing his scythe, Fei Yun met the incoming blow. Wanting to use bare hands to face his celestial tool? What a joke! Even though this scythe was only a 4-star pseudo-celestial tool, it had been sharpened by a celestial king, and had just a sliver of the might of a celestial king. It was incredibly sharp, and had indirectly increased his battle prowess. Come, see if I won't slice off your fist, and we'll see if you will still move your hands unnecessarily. Ling Han saw this, but he still maintained his posture of delivering a punch without change. However, he did begin to channel the Shenyan source water. Peng! The scythe slashed over, landing on Ling Han's wrist, and creating a clash of great Tao and a conflict of regulations. Countless seals were torn to bits, but Ling Han's fist was unscathed. He pierced through all this, and continued to deliver his attack towards Fei Yun. Freak! This time, Fei Yun was really stunned. The weapon had been sharpened by a celestial king, and still couldn't slice off Ling Han's wrist. Have your defenses been strengthened by a celestial king? Of course not. That was because the Shenyan source water had shown its might. This was a source power of heaven and earth. Though it was limited by Ling Han's own cultivation level, could Fei Yun really unleash the full might of a celestial king? Of course not. Moreover, only a sliver of his power had been boosted by a celestial king, while the Shenyan source water was Ling Han's own source power. How could it compare? Thus, since both sides had been weakened, Ling Han naturally was unharmed. Peng! The punch blasted, and landed on Fei Yun's body, sending his whole person flying. Ling Han shot out, catching up to him with a single step. Again, another punch flew out. Peng! Fei Yun's figure instantly flew upwards into the skies. Peng! 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 Ling Han caught up, and continued the barrage of blows. Fei Yun was really deserving of being a top-tier monarch tier. Even if he wasn't, he should be very close to it. His whole person curled into a ball, his hands covering his face, and guarding this spot, which was also the most important region. This was enough to ensure he did not sustain heavy injury. Ling Han had a great many ways to pierce through this defense, like the 9 heavens flame, the Shenyan source water, or using the 3 types of power of regulation that the Black Tower had, but against this kind of trash, did he have to use such high-level techniques? You want to be a coward, right? Fine. He shot out a foot. Peng! Fei Yun was instantly sent flying madly into the skies. Then, Ling Han summoned an iron spear. This was the wager that Mo Shuang had given to him, a pseudo-celestial tool previously owned by someone he did not know. Xiao! Ling Han used the power of space. His figure flashed, and crossed the dimension of space. In a few moves, he caught up to Fei Yun. Then, he struck out the spear in a direct stab, aimed straight at the latter's behind. No. Though Fei Yun was grabbing his head, when the divine sense of a celestial expanded, what difference did it have with witnessing it with his own eyes? This spear was going to rape his *s. His face had turned green. In complete public, in front of the eyes of many, if his *s was raped by a spear, just how would he be able to continue living? However, for the sake of protecting his vital points, he had curled himself into a tight ball, so how could he easily change the course of his flight? He hurriedly stretched out his body, wanting to use a movement technique. Even if he would suffer a blow to his thigh, he could not allow his *s to suffer. But his body had just stretched out when this strike had already reached him. Half the spear had instantly directly sunk in. Who asked him to deliberately stretch out his body, as if he was welcoming the penetration of the iron spear. "Ao!" he screamed in agony, his whole person stretching out into a straight line. "Disgusting." Ling Han hurriedly flicked his hands and tossed Fei Yun out. Peng! Fei Yun fell down from the skies, crashing heavily onto the ground and producing a cloud of dust. He maintained a sprawled-out posture, while there was still a shaking spear that was stuck in his behind. In truth, he had not fainted. This kind of attack was not strong enough to cause him serious injury, but the crux of the matter was that this was a humiliation, so he did not even dare to raise his head. As a noble monarch tier, one that was ranked 6th even in the wide prosperity heaven, he had actually been a *S raped in public. Instantly, everyone from the wide prosperity heaven felt like they had a common enemy, turning their furious eyes on Ling Han, while feeling like Ling Han had humiliated the entire wide prosperity heaven. Public enemy. Ling Han was unconcerned. Since they were going to fight over the fiery flame lightning strike wood, he was going to defeat all order prodigies. "Even if you hate me, go ahead. Worse come to worst, I will just suppress all of you." However, even though they hated him, not one person jumped out to challenge Ling Han. Fei Yun was a good example. Why isn't Lord Yi here yet? What about Fairy Shu? How about Tang Minglong? The prodigies of the wide prosperity heaven all called out loudly, their emotions excited. Yi was the existence that was ranked at the top of severing mundane tier in the wide prosperity heaven. No one knew if it was his surname that was Yi or his actual name that was Yi, or if it was actually just an alias. He was an extremely mysterious person, but his strength was astonishingly amazing, and it was undebatable that he was ranked first. Shu Yarong, the #1 beauty of the wide prosperity heaven, who was also #2 in the rankings of severing mundane tier. Meanwhile, Tang Minglong was ranked 3rd. The strength of these three was clearly a level stronger than the other monarch tiers. Thus, the prodigies of the wide prosperity heaven were sure that as long as these three arrived, any of them would be able to suppress Ling Han easily. In such an excited atmosphere, no one noticed that Fei Yun had quietly dug a hole and had already crawled in. Then, he dug deeper and deeper, climbed further and further. He had fled. Ling Han walked back to his original spot and saw that Yang Xianlu and the others were all looking excited. Brother Ling, Lord Ling. This was too awesome, standing up strongly for the calm peace heaven. It should be known that ever since they had come, the people of the wide prosperity heaven had all looked contemptuously at them, looking down very much on the calm peace heaven. But now, reality had smacked them hard in the face. Weren't the monarch tiers ranked 6th and 9th still sent off in defeat? Shishouwen fortunately had run off fast enough, or he would be a *S raped too. They all discussed spiritedly, and everyone felt regretful that Shishouwen had not been a *S raped as well, which involuntarily made Ling Han sweat madly. He probably hadn't started a trend of a *S raping, right? That scene was too filthy and too violent, and he dared not think more about it. Too bad. Even Hu Niu looked regretful. Niu actually did not think of such a fun thing. Her eyes lit up, and her gaze swept over the gathered masses from the wide prosperity heaven, looking very much like she wanted to catch one of them for an experiment. Not good. This girl was a curious kitten. He definitely could not allow her to learn such a despicable move. Ling Han hurriedly wrapped Hu Niu in his arms, changing the topic to food. Instantly, Hu Niu was drooling, and she had successfully forgotten the action of a *S raping that was completely unfit for girls to do. So close. Chapter 1959, Top-Grade Monarch Tiers Arrive. Chapter 1959, Top-Grade Monarch Tiers Arrive. Another day later, an important figure from the wide prosperity heaven finally arrived. Tang Minglong. Just hearing the name of this person would make it very easy to imagine a broad-shouldered man with tall build, but in truth, he was a dwarf. His figure was covered with wrinkles, and he had a head of grey hair. No matter what, no one would probably be able to connect him with their image of a top-grade monarch tier. But it was rumored that this was the reincarnation of a celestial king. No one knew why a celestial king had to choose such an unbearable body, nor did they understand why the celestial king had not mended this body with his own ways. To all severing mundane tiers, this would only be a piece of cake, so it could not possibly be difficult for a celestial king to accomplish. If the rumors were true, and Tang Minglong was really the reincarnation of a celestial king, further thought would bring the realization of just how incredibly terrifying the new generation of the wide prosperity heaven was. If even the reincarnation of a celestial king could only be ranked third, then just how powerful could Yi and Shu Yarong be? Lord Tang. A considerable number took the initiative to stand and greet him, and only the monarch tiers were relatively more reserved. So what if you were a celestial king? You had already dropped down to rock bottom, and all of us would be able to become celestial kings in the future, so who would have to fear anyone else? What everyone respected would always be true strength. Tang Minglong was standoffish, appearing to be slightly antisocial. Someone who had loose lips immediately pointed at Ling Han, and called, "Lord Tang, this person has insulted our whole wide prosperity heaven." Tang Minglong looked over. However, there was only a hint of confusion in his eyes. He did not speak up to ask further. That person hurriedly related the matters that had happened previously, and then looked at Tang Minglong impatiently, hoping that he would stand up angrily, and seek recompense for the wide prosperity heaven, as well as stamp down completely on the calm peace heaven. Trash was still trash after all. When Tang Minglong heard all this, his eyes turned on Ling Han and Hu Niu. His gaze flickered slightly. Then, he closed his eyes, and sat down in a cross-legged position on a huge rock, looking like he did not want to be disturbed by such trivial matters. Everyone from the wide prosperity heaven was disappointed by this, yet they could not compel Tang Minglong to make a move. They could only hope that Ling Han and Tang Minglong would meet each other after the Three Blooms Valley opened. "We don't need to wait that long. When Lord Yi is here, he will definitely step out to suppress Ling Han," someone said with full confidence. This won the agreement of many, and even the monarch tiers looked reverent. They were all monarch tiers, but Yi was too strong, reaching the point that even they could only look up at him. In the blink of an eye, another 2 days had passed. All of a sudden, fragrance diffused in the wind, and multiple beautiful blooms floated down from the skies. However, when one stretched out his hand to touch it, he would realize that these weren't real flowers, but mere images. However, the fragrance was real. Fragrance wafts 10,000 miles, Fairy Shu is here. Immediately, everyone from the wide prosperity heaven became excited. Shu Yarong. Not only was she the #1 beauty of the wide prosperity heaven, she was also the second strongest elite of the severing mundane tier. Under these two halos, it was natural that she would seem like a goddess from the 9 heavens, noble and graceful. Very soon, a white figure was rapidly coming from the distance. She was an extremely beautiful woman. She was dressed in snow-white robes, with multiple colorful butterflies on her skirts. Occasionally, they would flap their wings and fly, but they would immediately soon turn into bits of light and disappear. These were not real butterflies, but something formed by regulations. Ling Han couldn't help but feel his heart jolt. This woman had not deliberately channeled any technique. This was the automatic manifestation of great Tao, which was extremely shocking. This was the effect brought on by a divine fetus. Fairy Shu. Fairy Shu. Fairy Shu. All those from the wide prosperity heaven approached to greet her. Even Tang Minglong couldn't help but open his eyes, and glanced at Shu Yarong's face. His wrinkled face showed a strange expression, and then he closed his eyes back again. He continued to meditate, appearing to be unconcerned by all else. Shu Yarong was exquisitely beautiful. Though Liu Han was also a beauty, and she was ranked just below her, when the two women stood side by side, one would discover that Liu Han was obviously inferior to the former. However, everyone had no choice but to admit that whenever Shu Yarong had appeared in the past, she would immediately become the sole center of attention of the whole area, but it was a different case now. Her charms were completely suppressed by another woman. Hu Niu. No matter from which angle they looked at it, it was Hu Niu that was superior. Though this little girl did not have much of an image, just see, she was already eating in public, one hand holding a chicken thigh, and her mouth oily from her Fudanion's heart would still be moved by her beauty. To say nothing of Hu Niu, even those two women by her side were similar. One's face was veiled, but her figure was perfect and flawless. Furthermore, she had an unmatchable noble air. She could captivate anyone without any need to show her true appearance. The other was seductively beautiful. Her almond-shaped eyes were capable of saying words, enchanting and alluring. Xu Yarong had clearly discovered their presence as well. She looked towards Hu Niu, and a hint of shock flashed through her eyes. There was also an indescribable look in her eyes, a very complex mixture of astonishment and reverence. Naturally, another began to make complaints to Xu Yarong, trying to sow discord. Xu Yarong only smiled slightly. Instead, she nodded at Ling Han and Hu Niu, and then walked to one side, waiting silently for the Three Blooms Valley to open. Fine, Xu Yarong was not willing to move, either. They could only anticipate Yi then. This guy was incredibly vicious, and would start a fight at the slightest disagreement. He did not care whether he was in the right or not. He only had to beat his foe into submission, so even if he had been wrong, he would become right. Yi, come quickly. One day passed after another. Time passed very quickly. Though several other emperor tiers had come aside from Yi, all the other monarch tiers had arrived, there was still no trace of Yi. A very great change occurred in the Three Blooms Valley. These several days, wild winds filled the air, as if they intended to break through the heavens. Boom, multiple streaks of fire would occasionally soar skywards, and there would be bolts of lightning striking down as well, as if some existence was undergoing the heavenly tribulation. The fiery flame lightning strike wood is about to appear. Many cried out, appearing incredibly expectant. Source power of heaven and earth could only be obtained through a stroke of fate. Who knew, it might be them that were the fated ones? For this kind of bizarre scene to appear, it meant that the opening of the Three Blooms Valley would be within the next 2 to 3 days. But where was Yi? Why was he still not here? One day later, shio, a flood of arrows appeared in the skies, shooting rapidly down from the skies, and enshrouding everyone that was standing at the entrance. Who dares to be so insolent? Humph! Damn it! Everyone moved, and dispersed this wave of attack. This was an Emperor tier-level attack. Thus, some looked strained, but for monarch tiers, it could not be easier to deal with. Shio, another arrow streaked past, shooting straight for a monarch tier. How dare you! That monarch tier shot out a punch. Peng, the arrow of light shattered, but a flash of blood flickered across that monarch tier's fist. He had actually been wounded by this blow. Everyone inhaled sharply. Clearly, the last attack had not been delivered with the full force of the person who had launched the sneak attack. Shio, another arrow shot over, but this time, the target had been switched to another person. One arrow followed another. These attacks were all very crafty, shooting from different angles. It was like the sneak attacker was unleashing his attacks from different locations. Even top-grade monarch tiers like Ling Han, Hu Niu, Xu Yarong, and Tang Minglong were being attacked. Who is the bastard that dares to sneak attack Niu? Hu Niu jumped up, flying into a thunderous fury. The Empress was fiddling with an arrow in one hand, and the beautiful face under the gauzy veil also showed a hint of anger. Someone actually dared to launch a sneak attack on her. Ha 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 ha. Following a loud laugh, a young man strode out, his hands holding a silver bow that was about 1/2 a foot long. I am Ji Wuming, and hereby greet all of you. Chapter 1960 Wuming, Celestial Tool. Chapter 1960 Wuming, Celestial Tool. Ji Wuming. They all exchanged looks, and then shook their heads. This person was really Wuming. None of them had heard of this character. However, everyone immediately looked furious. This man attacked them without distinguishing any target, and had provoked so many people all by himself. Just how outrageously bold could he be? What is the meaning of this? A monarch tier asked with forced patience. The reason why he had asked instead of directly attacking was because the attacks that Ji Wuming had previously launched were all too weak. Without absolute uncertainty, how could anyone dare to make a move? What if it led to his own embarrassment? Moreover, there were still such top-grade monarch tiers like Xu Yarong, Tang Minglong, and Ling Han present. Even if anyone were to stand up in resistance, it would not be them, right? I just wanted to take a look at all your strength, Ji Wuming stated calmly. This kind of answer caused a great many to be outraged. Just because he wanted to take a look at their strength, he attacked them without any prior warning? What if they were injured then? Of course, no one would say such words. How could it be that cultivators feared battle? The people of the wide prosperity heaven all looked at Shu Yarong and Tang Minglong, while the people of the calm peace heaven looked towards Ling Han and Hu Niu. However, Shu Yarong and Tang Minglong were only staring at Ji Wuming, or to be more exact, staring at the white bow in his hands. Hu Niu gave a soft yi, and said, "I seem to have a little recollection of that bow." She thought for a while, then clapped her hands suddenly, and declared, "That is the minor heaven's complete bow." What? What? Ling Han hurriedly asked. Hu Niu nodded, looking very serious and solemn, and said, "Niu isn't very clear, either. I just have some vague recollection. That is a celestial tool, and belongs to the very, very powerful category even among celestial tools." "That's right, minor heaven's complete bow," Shu Yarong continued. "The bow is made from the trunk of the world tree, while the string is made from a main tendon of a ninth heaven immortal dragon. One only has to pull the bow string slightly, and it would be able to shatter the heavens. World tree, ninth heaven immortal dragon. Among the source powers of heaven and earth, the world tree was one of the 9 great ancestral woods. A bow made from this wood should be unsurpassed by anything else. At most, another object would only be able to catch up to it. And the main tendon of a ninth heaven immortal dragon was even more frightening because the source power of heaven and earth could only represent celestial king tier, while a ninth heaven immortal dragon represented the pinnacle of celestial king tier. Merely these two objects were already supremely precious treasures, but now they were put together and used to construct a celestial tool. The value of this was practically unimaginable. Hence, though this thing looked so small it seemed like a toy, its might was incredibly astonishing. If news of it spread out, even celestial kings would be tempted. Whether it was snatching it in public or stealing it secretly, they would definitely make a move. Even Ling Han was a little tempted, but as long as others did not come to trifle with him, he would not think of stealing just because someone else had something precious. Of course, the fact that Ji Wuming had attacked him without rhyme or reason just now was already enough reason to make Ling Han angry, and thus make a move. "Hihi, not too bad." Ji Wuming laughed. "Everyone, the opening of the Three Blooms Valley is close at hand. A source power of heaven and earth will appear. You all don't mind if you have an additional competitor, right?" "Sir, which heaven do you belong to?" Shu Yarong asked. "Traveling the world, not belonging to any heaven." Ji Wuming gave a very vague answer. In truth, due to the fact that he called himself Wuming, it would be very, very hard for others not to pay particular attention to his identity. A top-grade monarch tier, and one that had a top-grade celestial tool, appeared out of nowhere. Why did everyone think that there was something off about this? Shu Yarong calmly said, "Everyone has a share of natural treasures. Obtaining it would have to depend on your own fortune and strength. I am quite confident in my own strength, though," Ji Wuming answered with a smile. His eyes swept over the gathered masses, a strange smile curling the corners of his lips. Then, he sat down at the side as well, closing his eyes to rest. Everyone was infuriated by this. This guy had just launched an offensive against them, and now he actually dared to sit down right in front of them, looking like nothing whatsoever had happened. How could they not be angered by this? But neither Shu Yarong nor Tang Minglong looked like they had any intention of making a move, so the people of the wide prosperity heaven all wilted. On the side of the calm peace heaven, Ling Han was quite intrigued. He had a feeling that this Ji Wuming was the same level as Shu Yarong and Tang Minglong, and was worthy of being a strong rival for him. This caused his fighting spirit to begin blazing. Very good, he could now fight to his heart's content. The mystery realm has opened. Just at this moment, someone suddenly cried out. At the entrance, the mist was rapidly dissipating, revealing a valley path that was slanting downwards. It was very wide, about 3,000 meters wide, and it was very even, as if it had been sliced out with blades. Really, there were clear signs of the rocks having been sliced. It was absolutely impossible that these marks had been created through wind erosion. It is said that when the ultimate celestial kings battle, Their battlegrounds could possibly transform into a natural mystery realm, someone said slowly. This Three Blooms Valley had also been formed in that way. Ahead of them, the mist was dissipating even faster and faster, as if it had suddenly been absorbed by the ground, and their vision became incredibly clear. Let's go. Someone immediately leaped out, entering into the valley. It was fine even if they were not the strongest. They only had to be the one to arrive first in front of the fiery flame lightning strike would, and then they would gain a chance of being selected. Which one of those gathered here was not at least an emperor tier? Wasn't an emperor tier impressive enough? Thus, the stupid bird would fly first. Let's go too, let's go too. Hunyo shouted in excitement, arms wrapped around one of Ling Han's arms. All right, we'll go too, Ling Han said smilingly. He first drew the heavenly phoenix divine maiden into the black tower. Those whose cultivation levels had reached the dividing soul tier or further than that could not enter, but it did not mean that those below the severing mundane tier could easily enter. It only permitted severing mundane tiers. Hunyo ran energetically ahead. She was practically dragging Ling Han along with her, while Ling Han and the Empress walked side by side. Finally, the last person was bewitching Maiden Ru, looking a bit like a wife that had been bullied. In the past, she only feared the Empress, and now there was another Hunyo. Both of them could restrain her easily. The Empress was majestic and stern, born as a ruler, while Hunyo was completely unreasonable. If you did not obey, she would just beat you up, and continue beating you up until you obeyed. Yang Xianlu and the others also moved out. They had long since formed an alliance. They could use a formation to oppose an existence stronger than themselves. Hence, they similarly were filled with confidence. The contest was going to begin from this moment. Getting a source power of heaven and earth naturally could grant them a complete rebirth, so they could make up for the distance that separated them from top-grade monarch tiers. The path in the valley was slanting downwards, and the further down, the wider the path became. Occasionally, underground gases would spray out, turning into incredibly beautiful blooms of great Tao. But no one dared touch them. The slightest touch would result in either death or injury, and it would be serious injury at that. It was even possible that they would never be able to heal such injuries. These blooms did not have roots, and would slowly float. One had to dodge them at the first instant. Though they were floating very slowly, it was like they were capable of instant teleportation. In truth, they were not the slightest bit slow. Thus, one had to maintain absolute caution against them. Furthermore, the further down, the more the number of these blooms of great Tao would increase. They were close to covering the entire path in the valley, so one did not know where it was safe to set his foot. Ling Han and his group were all cautious. Now that they were here, even Hunyo did not dare to be rash. This made the little girl very displeased. Her lips pouted, her unhappiness written all over her face. Thankfully, only the blooms of great Tao were floating around. If an enemy suddenly appeared at this moment, it really would not be easily dealt with. An entire 3 days later, the path of them finally became even. Had they reached the bottom of the valley? Whom are the funeral bells ringing for? A low voice rang out. Chapter 1961, Regulation of Slaughter. Chapter 1961, Regulation of Slaughter. A person had appeared ahead of them. However, it was really very difficult to use the word person to describe him. He could only be considered a human-like figure. His body was covered with sharp spikes of varying width, some thinner, and some thicker, appearing very bizarre. These spikes were completely unlike adornments, but rather seemed to be growing directly from his body, and looked very natural. Ling Han and his group were surprised. This human figure had to be a being of the Three Blooms Valley. Otherwise, they definitely had not seen such a monster come in with them, and one that had managed to rush ahead of them at that. This place was actually capable of nurturing living beings. They did not hear Yang Xianlu speak of this. Ling Han did not think that Yang Xianlu would deliberately hide this kind of information. Of course, it was also impossible that the eternal prosperity celestial king had deliberately concealed it from his beloved disciple. Then, there was only one reason, and that was this monster had been birthed only in the last 100 million years. It could be tens of millions years ago, or hundreds of thousands of years ago. In fact, it could even be as recently as 3 to 5 days ago. How could the mysterious and profound nature of nature be easily guessed? And whom are the war drums made for? This human-like monster continued, his voice very low. Accompanied by the tone that he was using, he seemed like an old soldier that had lived through many battles, relating his reflective thoughts of war. Stupid monster, why are you acting all mysterious? Isn't it just because you want to fight? Come, Nyo will oblige. Nyo called out loudly, but before the human-like monster made a move, the Empress had already charged out. Boom, she shot out a punch, and sword chi danced madly. Why Yaya, you are so despicable, this is Nyo's. Nyo stomped in fury, and charged out as well, attacking that human-like monster. Now that she had made a move, the strength of the human-like monster was clear to see. Young soul. Against severing mundane tear, this should be completely one-sided. Unfortunately, whether it was the Empress or Nyo, neither of them were ordinary severing mundane tear, but rather fifth severance monarch tears. In terms of cultivation level, they were equivalent to Yang Soul, and in terms of battle prowess, they could still be invincible in a battle against an opponent that was one cultivation level higher than them. Which also meant that they could defeat even Yin Soul elites. Under the combined forces of these two women, how was this human-like monster supposed to resist? Peng, peng, peng. In a chaotic tussle, he was very quickly beaten up. What was strange was the fact that this human-like monster did not have a body. Under the masses of spikes, the body was actually empty. There was only a crimson stone that was like its heart. However, it was only as big as a segment of a pinky. Why do you have to fight with Nyo? Nyo was not willing to give up the matter, and glared at the Empress. The Empress, meanwhile, couldn't be bothered to give her any regard, looking like she was treating her like a child, so she would not lower herself to Nyo's level. Despicable witch. Nyo stomped in fury, clinging onto the Empress tirelessly. She was determined to get a reply. There were times when she was really very obstinate. Ling Han, meanwhile, picked up that crimson stone. However, his hand had just touched it when a boundless red immediately surged out in his mind. Shadows of swords and blades presented a complete massacre. He immediately showed an expression of shock, and exclaimed, "Regulation of slaughter." The Black Tower also contained regulation of slaughter, and he had attained a superficial comprehension thereof, so he was not the slightest bit unfamiliar with this regulation of slaughter. The Empress was immediately interested, and came closer to see. Hey, witch, you haven't said why you have to fight with Nyo yet. Nyo said, unrelenting. Regulation of slaughter? Bewitching Maiden Ru also approached, similarly filled with interest. You're saying that this contains the regulation of slaughter? The regulation of slaughter was outside of the 5 elements and lightning. Usually, there would completely be no chance to study it, so it was incredibly precious. Ling Han glared at her, and retorted, even if there is, it's none of your business. Bewitching Maiden Ru was irritated. This unromantic rude boar, she really wanted to strangle him. Ling Han tossed the stone to the Empress. He had the Black Tower, and could study the regulation of slaughter at any time, so he did not need this kind of thing. The Empress would naturally not act reserved with him, and put the blood-colored stone away. Bewitching Maiden Ru pouted slightly. She, too, wanted it, but Ling Han didn't even bother to ask her. He really was despicable. Which, Nyo is speaking to you. Nyo was abruptly still unwilling to give up. With Nyo constantly pressing for an answer, they walked ahead for about 2 to 3 miles, and another human-like monster covered completely with sharp spikes appeared again. Nyo screamed, and hurriedly made the first move to attack. Very soon, she killed this monster. As expected, the sharp spikes fell, and it was completely empty inside, except for a small stone that was as red as blood. It's still regulation of slaughter. Ling Han nodded, and then tossed the stone over to the Empress again. Because the valley had become completely even here, and there was nothing resembling a path, but it had rather become a massive plain, they were like stones that been thrown into the ocean, not creating even the slightest ripple. Everyone would definitely have chosen a different direction, and after walking for an extended distance, this difference would be huge. Thus, Ling Han and his group did not catch up to the people ahead of them, nor were they surpassed by those behind them. Whether they were still in the lead, or had fallen behind, they had completely no idea. Hoo! 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 A strange animal sound rang out, and a weird demonic beast appeared ahead of them. From the looks of it, it should be a hog, but it was similarly covered with sharp spikes, which instantly made its size double, giving off a twisted feeling of pressure. I'll go. Bewitching Maiden Ru was the first to move. If this monster was still killed by Ling Han, the Empress, or Hu Niu, she would not be able to bring herself to ask for a share of the precious gems that contained the regulation of slaughter. But if she took the initiative to attack first, then even if she would only be watching from the sidelines for the rest of the battle, she could still bring herself to shamelessly ask for a share of the loot later, right? She moved directly. Her slender hand shook, and a wooden sword appeared in her hands, which she slashed out towards the blade hog. Xiao, sword chi surged out, turning into a brilliant light. This strike was struck on the blade hog, but not even a single spike had been severed. Instead, it made this blade hog focus on her, and a murderous aura instantly surged over. Bewitching Maiden Ru's beautiful face paled, and she almost passed out. This was regulation of slaughter, which was incredibly frightening. Even Ling Han's expression changed immediately, and he exclaimed, "Not good, this thing is Earth Soul level." Hong, long, long, the blade hog charged towards Ling Han and his group in a flurry of its hooves. Come, let's give it a try. Ling Han's fighting spirit was ignited, and he greeted it with a punch. Peng! Ling Han was immediately sent flying, so fast that his figure was like a cannonball that had been shot. Ling Han had been sent flying for close to several hundred miles before he finally managed to slow himself down. He saw that the part of his robes covering his abdomen had been torn, revealing a circular wound, and traces of blood had also appeared on his abdomen. He had actually suffered injury from this blow. Earth Soul level battle prowess was indeed terrifying. Ling Han rubbed his abdomen and gritted his teeth. As expected of regulation of slaughter. Otherwise, merely Earth Soul alone would not have been able to damage his physical body so easily. This little injury was not enough to drive him into a breakdown, but the problem was that his attack was far inferior to his defense. Fighting with this blade hog only meant that he would be barraged with attacks, so what was the point? Flee? Hide into the Black Tower? Ling Han shook his head. In a motion of space teleportation, Xiao, he instantly appeared in front of that blade hog. He drew the divine demon sword, and delivered a strike. Wang, majestic light unleashed in all directions as sword chi filled the skies. The blade hog naturally would not be afraid. With a shake of its body, Xiao, 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 countless spikes shot out, blasting towards Ling Han. In that short instant, this blade hog had turned into a naked hog. Ling Han stretched out a hand, and lightly said, "Time, stop." Wang, whether it was the blade hog or the spikes and blades that were filling the skies, they all entered into a paused condition at the same time. Chapter 1962, Celestial King Bloodstone. Chapter 1962, Celestial King Bloodstone. This was not Ling Han's ability, but rather the Black Tower's might. When the flow of time slowed down to the maximum, the result was immobility. Shua, the divine demon sword swept out, and with a pu, a high-quality hog's head flew skywards out of nowhere. However, it instantly vanished, and the body of the hog also collapsed, similarly breaking into bits and pieces, and leaving behind only a single stone as red as blood. Hu! Ling Han used the divine demon sword like a cane, continuously panting, his expression very ugly. The price for using this move was too massive, exhausting him completely. It was not only his origin power, but also his soul. His whole person seemed to have become a blank piece of paper, where the only thing remaining was emptiness. He could use time acceleration and deceleration as he liked, but the more serious the effects, and the wider the range, the more it would take out of him. This apex immobility of time made Ling Han directly lose all ability to continue battle. Furthermore, this move could only be used once a month in real time. It was useless even if he went into the time cultivation chamber. The Black Tower would need to draw out a certain energy from real space. Ling Han, you are so awesome. Hu Niu immediately pounced. You managed to kill even an Earth Soul level monster with a single move. So awesome, so great, Niu wants to have kids with you. Everything the little girl said was all for the sake of the last line, yet Ling Han was only willing to embrace her and kiss her, which made Niu very displeased. Peng, Ling Han was immediately pushed down by Hu Niu. At this point, he did not have the slightest bit of strength left. Hu Niu giggled, and planted kisses on Ling Han's face non-stop. Not only did she kiss him, she also licked and bit him, acting very much like a little kitten. Meanwhile, bewitching Maiden Ru was incredibly stunned. That creature just now was an Earth Soul level monster, and Ling Han had actually killed it with a single strike. Just how strong was he? Yet she did not know that this was not Ling Han's own battle prowess, but rather the might of the Black Tower. It could only be used once a month, and had almost drained Ling Han completely. If there were a few more enemies, that would only be a suicidal action. However, this time she could shamelessly pick up that blood-colored stone. But the moment she moved, she saw that the Empress grabbed the stone in her hand with a wave of her hand. "Sister," she called out plaintively. The Empress swept a stern eye on her, and said, "I have my own plans on the allocation." Oh. Bewitching Maiden Ru twiddled her fingers. In front of the Empress, she would not have the slightest temper. "Girlie, get up." Ling Han was almost suffocated by Hu Niu's kisses, yet the other two women did not seem like they had any intention of giving him a hand. Hu Niu giggled, and said, "Let's have babies." This was constantly in her mind. Ling Han began to lecture her righteously again, and took out a considerable amount of food before the little girl temporarily forgot about the matter of having babies. He recovered some energy, and finally could stand up and walk around. "What stone is this exactly?" It actually contains a sliver of regulation of slaughter. Ling Han had the Empress take out all the blood-colored stones. The stone that represented the Earth Soul monster was very clearly much larger. "This is Celestial King Bloodstone." Small Tower suddenly spoke up. In an intense Celestial King tier battle, blood splatters on the ground, and these stones have been stained with a sliver of Celestial King tier blood, yet had not shattered. After countless years of development, a strange change has taken place, Small Tower explained. Realization dawned on Ling Han. No wonder there had been strange human-like creatures and demonic beasts, but when they were killed, there was no actual body. As it turned out, the root of everything was the blood that had been left behind by the Celestial King. As expected of a Celestial King, he had merely spilled a little blood, yet after countless years, it could actually result in such a shocking mutation. Then this Celestial King must have cultivated the regulation of slaughter, he surmised resolutely. At least 7th Heaven Celestial King. Small Tower also made its own deduction. It looked like the rumors were not false. A great many natural mystery realms had been the battlegrounds that had been left behind after Celestial Kings battled, and contained the immortal and ageless will of the Celestial King. After countless years of development, the power of heaven and earth would also be added in, so it would become a natural mystery realm. Ling Han nodded, and said to the Empress, "Put them away. Looks like we should be able to encounter more of such monsters, and collect even more Celestial King bloodstones." He roughly outlined Small Tower's words to them. Ordinarily, one could only cultivate the regulations of the 5 elements and lightning, while other regulations could only be gained through specific celestial medicine or certain unusual treasures. However, these regulations were more powerful, and could be maintained until right before Celestial King tier. Hence, the value of these Celestial King bloodstones was extraordinarily high. From a different perspective, the value of the Black Tower was what was truly astounding. It actually contained the 3 regulations of slaughter, time, and space. If Ling Han comprehended these regulations, and was still unable to become an emperor that destroyed all his peers, then he really would be trash. The 4 of them continued on their way, and very soon, they encountered another human-like monster. Hu Niu and the Empress rushed forward together, and dealt with it quickly. But subsequently, they encountered a great dilemma. Another beast-like monster appeared, having Earth Soul level battle prowess, and chasing Ling Han and his group to scramble everywhere. Thankfully, this monster seemed to have a specific range of activity. After they left this range, this monster would also stop, and no longer pursue them. The four of them exchanged looks, and suddenly broke out into laughter. In a battle of equals, they had never been chased everywhere by their opponents. This was a very novel experience. After we break through to the dividing soul tier, we will be able to beat these monsters easily. Ling Han rubbed his nose. It was unfortunate that time stop could only be used once a month. Otherwise, there would have been no need for him to run. However, after we break through to the dividing soul tier, we won't be able to enter this place anymore, the Empress said. Nyo can. Nyo exclaimed, raising her hand. Nyo also has a great ultimate move, and killing these monsters would be as easy as slaughtering chickens. How frequently can you use it? Ling Han asked. Once every 3 months. Nyo raised 3 fingers. Ling Han nodded, and said, don't waste it on these minor characters. Unless in a life or death situation, don't use it. This is to be used to save your life. Okay, Nyo knows. Nyo nodded obediently. They continued to go deeper, and when they encountered Yang Soul and Yin Soul monsters, they would move to kill them. If their opponent was Earth Soul level, they could only break into a run and flee. After these several times, they had also diverted from their original course, but it could be confirmed that they were still heading to the depths of the valley because those 3 peaks were there as their guide, so they couldn't possibly have lost their way. This valley was astonishingly huge, and they weren't able to use movement techniques to sprint at full speed ahead, either. Thus, their speed of traveling was naturally not going to be fast. A whole 3 months had passed, and they still hadn't made it to the middle. That was because they still hadn't reached the foot of the 3 peaks. This would be the sign that they reached the middle. According to Yang Xianlu, there is also great fortune at the foot of the 3 peaks, Ling Han said. But as for exactly what it is, the Eternal Prosperity Celestial King did not tell him. Then let us go and take a look. It should not take too much time. The Empress nodded. They headed to the left mountain peak. 7 days later, Nyo suddenly stopped, and then looked like she was sniffing around. Then, her eyes narrowed. So aromatic. Ling Han naturally believed the nose of a glutton with absolute certainty, and asked, what do you smell? The aroma of celestial medicine. Nyo opened her eyes. So fragrant, at least 5 billion years old, and has reached small accomplishment at least. Then we need to go and take a look. The 4 of them changed course, with Nyo leading the way. They followed the aroma, and after they walked more than 100 miles, only then did Ling Han and the Empress smell a refreshing fragrance. As expected, they could not compare to a glutton. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,